All right, so here we are again with another episode of Coffee with the Founder. Got my coffee cup here, ready to roll. And of course, we got another awesome guest, Shanelle Henry, who I've known for a number of years, friend, colleague, but a true sister. And I'm so glad to have you here with us. So we're trying to just let people know about our family associated, our network associated with the White Privilege Conference, the Privilege Institute. And so this is a chance to just give our people a good sense of all the folks who've helped and supported and been a part of that community. So let's start by asking you to introduce yourself. Who are you? What do you do? How do you describe yourself, your work, when you're meeting people out and about?
So thank you, Dr. Eddie Moore Jr. My name is Shanelle Henry. I am, well, how do I describe myself? Black girl from Brooklyn, first and foremost. Those who know. But seriously, I am a social justice educator, teacher, founder of the Institute for Teaching Social Justice. I am the Director of Equity and Inclusion at Greens Farms Academy in Connecticut, which is an independent school, private K-12 co-ed school in Connecticut. And, I've been working in this field of social justice, education, training, consulting for a long time. So that has included students, that has included adults, got my start in higher ed, working in higher education and colleges and universities. And that's where you and I connected actually some time ago, sir.
So tell me how you got here. From Black Girl Brooklyn to where you are in your job, but also, some of the work that you're doing. I wonder, did you grow up thinking, this is what I'm gonna do, this is where I'm gonna be? Kind of, what's been your journey to this point?
Right. Did I grow up thinking, this is what I'm doing, this is where I'm gonna be? No, because I did not know what that was. I did not have the words, the education, theory, language behind all the things that I was feeling growing up. On the one hand, and why I say Black girl from Brooklyn is because I was surrounded, grew up in Black and brown communities. K through 12, public school, right? K through 12. That was my experience growing up. Although New York City, Brooklyn's very diverse, it's also very segregated. So, you knew what neighborhoods it was safe to be in, and you knew what neighborhoods it was not safe to go to, or kind of the sundown towns, be out by dark. But that was my normal, and never really questioned it. It was just understood until I went to college in New England. You take this Black girl from Brooklyn and stick her in Northampton, Massachusetts, and my world turned upside down. It was through that experience, through finding coursework and classes and professors who gave me the language, the theory, the education behind what I was feeling, what I was experiencing, whether it was microaggressions, whether it was racism, oppression, being able to name it, helped me further learn how to deal with it. That is when, kind of to your point, to your question, that is when I made the conscious decision that this is what I wanted to do. With my life, with my career, I found a way to A, have a voice in that space, and B, found a way to educate others about their experiences, about this quote unquote invisible enemy, if you will, that we could feel and not see, but found a way to understand what institutionalized oppression meant, what systemic oppression and racism looked like, and what it meant, and how to also find this path of liberation, and what we could do about those things. And so that started my career in higher education. I stayed in that higher ed space for quite some time, working with students and adults around these very issues. And, when I think back to the early parts of my career in doing that and being able to connect with other people in that space doing that same work and bring those voices in, that, connected me to you, and being able to find other scholars in this field to introduce them into, the student space and the colleagues and adult spaces that we were in higher ed. And from there, that kind of started my trajectory into K-12, because through those workshops, trainings, conversations, especially with students, we're talking undergraduate, graduate level students, they didn't have the language. They didn't understand, those conversations and relationships with other people was very new to them. And so it started the question in my mind, where were they coming from? What schools were they coming from, right? When you think about students in 12th grade graduating, going off to college, and we say we're sending students out into the world, but they were arriving on the college doorstep with little knowledge about people who are different from them, little knowledge, like me, right, when I was an undergrad, about the experiences of oppression, identity, diversity in general. And so that was kind of my start and my impetus for going, back a step into the K-12 space to do this work and begin these conversations much earlier. So hopefully we're educating students and sending these young adults off into the world at a very different place than I know I was at that age, and the young adults that I was working with in the college space at that time.
Yeah, I want to ask you a little bit about the Institute for Teaching Social Justice, but before I do that, the K-12 arena, the arena of kids you're working with, is a unique group of kids. I think is worth mentioning, being the independent school world. What's your sense of the state of essentially the world of independent schools and the students as it relates to social justice, privilege, leadership, diversity, and really understanding these issues? Are you feeling a overwhelming interest, some pushback? What's kind of the state of that community around these issues as you've been kind of pushing, educating, working with particularly young people?
I think it's a mixed bag. So this particular generation, and in this particular space, as you're, thinking about students who go to independent schools, they consider themselves to some degree, and I am generalizing here, but to some degree, a multicultural group, right? When you think of this generation, they've grown up much more diverse in ways, much more diverse than we did. So even in an independent school space where, it's our job to increase the diversity of identities, of numbers, of backgrounds, all those things may not be as diverse as public schools or communities outside of there. But the students themselves feel like, yes, I have friends of many different types of backgrounds. I'm used to being in, diverse types of environments. However, when you try to have, construct conversations specifically around diversity, identity, equity, inclusion, some of the, and why I say mixed bag, some of the responses that you get are, well, why? Why are we talking about this, right? There's a less of a feeling of, less sense of importance because this is what they consider to be their normal or their day-to-day. And so by talking about differences feels like it's creating a division, right? We're doing the opposite of building inclusion by talking about the ways in which our identities, our experiences, our backgrounds may be different because they are growing up in a society and in a generation that feels like we are celebrating the ways in which we are similar. On the other hand, in particular, when you speak to, or when I speak to students of color, the sense I get from them and the conversations I have with them is that we are not speaking about their realities enough, or, in addition to that, their peers, most of whom are not students of color, feel that they feel a disconnect and that they can't understand their realities enough. So we're not doing enough to talk about it. And at the same time, there's, a disconnect and not being able to understand what their lived reality is because it is so different than their own. And so, you know, in many respects, the work that happens in those independent school spaces is trying to bridge that gap. In some ways, trying to be all things to all people, but again, in thinking about what do students of all backgrounds need to know, learn, experience, talk about that will help them in the higher education space. Whether it's, you know, conversations about the N-word, whether it's conversations about socioeconomic status and class, whether it's conversations about immigration, whether it's conversations around politics, right? Having those challenging and difficult conversations now will serve them better in the future. So I think all of this, is particularly now, is more growing increasingly relevant in that space.
So as what I consider one of the leading, not only experienced, but you know, action-oriented practitioners in the independent school world at this level doing this job, I'm wondering how you respond when I say, which is related to what I learned early on around doing diversity work, is you're not really doing equity diversity work if you're not factoring in white supremacy, white privilege, and other forms of oppression. And particularly in the kind of private school or independent school world, where often we can find some schools designed not to embrace diversity, but to escape diversity. So I'm wondering kind of how you respond to that. And then I don't know if you've had this asked of you, but I remember being or grappling with the question, could I be doing more in a Black school or more diverse school than I could be in these, you know, predominantly white kinds of institutions? So wondering if you've ever had to grapple with that or had that question asked of you as well.
I've asked it of myself, quite frankly. You know, in many years in doing this work, and particularly in these spaces, white spaces, privileged spaces, why am I here? What, you know, role am I serving? Is it window dressing? Is it really, you know, addressing the real work of anti-oppression and, you know, equity work that I would like to, you know, be doing? And is it really in the school's mission and what the school wants to be doing? And so in addressing the last question, why am I here? Why am I doing this work? Why is it important? I've answered that for myself in many different ways, but particularly around representation. That is, for me, extremely important as a Black woman, as a Black girl from Brooklyn, to show up, not just for my students of color. And in many of these schools, that's an unrepresented number, whether it's, you know, students of color in general, whether it's Black students in particular or Black female students in particular. But it is equally, if not at times more important for the white students to, you know, see me show up, see me doing this work, have these conversations, because again, it's important for them to have the language, have the knowledge when we talk about building allies. What does that mean? What does it look like? Why is it important for you as a white student to be able to name your identity and understand your identity, and whether it's privilege or, you know, marginalization, targeted groups, to have all of that language and experience? Why is that important for you, in addition to for students of color? Because we're all here together. And you're going off to college, once again, will you be placed in various experiences and environments where this knowledge and this experience will be beneficial for you. We are sending these students off into the world. We want to build and create better humans, better human beings, better people, who in turn, right, the next generation will hopefully help break down this system. So that's connected to white supremacy, right? Who are we talking about? Who is upholding the system? And we have these conversations all the time when we talk about institutional anything. Who comprises the institutions? The institutions don't stand alone. It takes the individual to comprise and work, right, the institution, and create the laws to uphold that system. So we want to educate these students in particular on how to dismantle and disrupt that system, and, you know, interrupt, be able to recognize and interrupt when they see it in action. And that starts young, that starts now. That particularly has meaning in privileged spaces like independent schools. So, I think my role, whether it's as director of equity and inclusion or as a Black woman in a predominantly white independent school space, whatever, way in which you want to think of it, my role, my presence in those spaces is important. For some of our families, some of our students, the only people they see that look like me may work for them, may not live in their community. You might never pass someone like me on the street or in the supermarket, right? I could be the only person who looks like me that you interact with from 7:30 to 3:30 at school every day. Outside of that, you don't see anyone else like me until you come back here the next day. And so how can I help educate those students and those families with the time that I spend with them to be able to talk about that, think about that, reflect on that, and in turn change that for the future?
Yeah, that's helpful. Um, I want to get to the Institute, but I got to ask you this because I know you, I know how you do the work. I know your commitment to the work. And when you do it like you do it, it can sometimes be taxing. And like you mentioned, you can be the first person of color, woman of color, brilliant, beautiful, talented, not only working with kids, working with their parents, but at the administrative table, where
Mhm.
some of those folks have never encountered Black genius, Black excellence. So just wondering, what's been your sense and your experience with some of the taxing, the wear and tear of the job, and how you take care of yourself?
Yeah, that's a great question and something I've had to learn. Um, I'm not very good at it. I haven't been. I'm trying to get better. I was just having this conversation with someone the other day. I saw kind of one of those horoscope things, and I'm a Virgo, and it talks about taking care of everyone else first before yourself, right? And I was reading it, and it's totally me. So I've had to do my due diligence of self-care and taking care of myself. This quarantine period has actually helped with that. Um, with gyms being closed, and I forced myself to start working out more and going to the gym when it was open. Now with gyms being closed, I've been really diligent about working out at home. Not as fun as going to the gym, but something that I've had to maintain just for my own, health and sanity, and being here at home and doing this work, continuing to do this work from home. Um, and the other piece of that has been I've always turned to music, particularly hip hop, again, growing up in Brooklyn. Um, the other piece of the quarantine that has, arisen kind of from this is club quarantine with DJ D Nice and tuning into him a few times a week on weekends. At first, it started out, kind of uh, fun, unique, kind of new thing to do at the beginning of the quarantine, but it's gone on and continued. And it actually helps uplift my spirits and kind of get the refuel I need to continue doing this work and get up and do it again the next day. So as I think about the power and the spirit of music, right? And growing up, always having music in my life. Between that and working out and just taking time, this quiet time, and we have lots of it now. I would say those three things, right? Kind of meditation, music, and just working out for health and for sanity.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I want to circle back to, your job and being you, because I'm assuming lots of people may ask, how can I get this job? This is something I want to do. And I'm wondering what kind of advice you give those young professionals that may be interested in pursuing this track. But I wanted to um, also go back to something I asked you about earlier. You mentioned earlier the Institute for Teaching Social Justice and being the founder of that. And just wondering what happened? What was the catalyst? How's it been going? Where is it now? Just give me a sense of uh, uh, the Institute for Teaching Social Justice. What sparked you to start it, and kind of where is it now? How's it doing? What's your thought as we look at pre-COVID, post-COVID?
Yeah, for sure. as I mentioned, I've been, doing this work for a number of years in various spaces, from higher ed to independent schools, nonprofit, and just thinking about all the materials and education and resources that I had when I moved to the independent school space as a director of diversity, not just working with students, but also working with faculty colleagues and ways in which we could help them, or I could help them, transform curriculum, and looking at professional development, and, ways in which they could grow as educators with an anti-bias lens, right? As you mentioned, white supremacy and all of those things. And again, bringing that knowledge, giving them that lens, that language, yet not having the time in a school day, the time after school, just finding the time to do the professional development in a responsible way, that would allow the educators to really reap the benefits of being able to develop in this area. So really what happened was being able to find that time after school, the school year ended, in that space between commencement and everyone disappearing for the summer. This Institute for Teaching Diversity and Social Justice started out as a 3-day, I think it was 2 or 3-day workshop, right, for teachers at the school I was working at the time. Again, thinking professional development for my faculty, and really decided to open it up to others in the New York area at that point in time, and said anyone who was interested to come join in on this. And it has just built and grown from there. I'm fortunate to work with one of my college buddies for a long time, Dr. Kiyathi Joshi. She and I went to grad school together at the University of Massachusetts Amherst. We both went through the social justice education program. So again, that knowledge, that education, those resources, bringing it to the independent school space. She and I have worked together for a long time to be able to train teachers. And each year it's grown from there. We are now at a full week, 5-day institute, and it has spread. Just, more schools have heard about it, more schools have hosted it. And so we now offer 3 institutes each summer. This year in particular, we are in New York, Connecticut, and Newport, Rhode Island. The way COVID, I guess, has impacted us, right, and all of us right now is things are on hold. Things are in flux, in limbo. We have 2 sessions that are scheduled to run this June, which we have not yet, made any decisions about. We are waiting to see what happens, both with our campus hosts, but with the rest of the world. We want to be responsible and don't want to put people in harm's way. And then the 3rd institute is in August, the one in Newport, Rhode Island. And again, we're kind of holding, waiting, let's see what happens with the rest of the world throughout the summer of 2020 before we make any final decisions there. But it has been such a wonderful response to not just us, but to this work, and to educators who want to learn about social justice, who want to learn not just about themselves, because we spend a lot of time doing our own personal identity work, but learn how to transform their curriculum and learn about their students. So taking all of the concepts we've been talking about, including, white privilege, white supremacy, and all those things. Many of them have been to the White Privilege Conference, and so they come to the Institute to learn, how do we talk about this with students? How do we build this into our curriculum? How do we take this back to our schools and our campuses and start to look at and transform our own policies and things like that? So we are, I think, in our 5th or 6th year of offering this institute in the independent school space. And like I said, the response has been heartening for sure.
Yeah. Well, congratulations on that. Knowing what it's like to start something for a little something and then see it expanding. I mean, I'm just so happy to see that. And anything WPC can do to continue to support that, let's keep collaborating. What do you say to young people or folks in general when they say, I want this job, I'm interested in this, I'd like to do what you do? What's been your pieces of advice or way you've guided people who may be interested in directing equity or following kind of your career path?
Mm-hmm. A few things actually come to mind. I asked them, first and foremost, what have they done? What have they been doing? What do they want to do? Right? Aligning those things, and also thinking about the different types of job descriptions and schools that are out there. Pay very close attention to those job descriptions. Do your research on the school. Research the mission. Ask a lot of questions. During the interview process, before and after. There are also some really good resources out there, one of them being the JEDI program, Justice and Equity Diversity Institute, offered in the New York area, that I think it's a 2-year program that trains folks how to do this particular job in independent schools, because I came through in a very unconventional route. As I said, I started in higher ed and worked in the nonprofit consulting space prior to coming into independent schools. And so that's a very different career track, having gone to UMass and studied, in a social justice program, very unconventional, whereas folks who are already in the independent school space many times have been doing this work just by virtue of necessity or who they are or what their interests have been. And so now through the JEDI program, there's a formal kind of educational training type of program you can take that speaks specifically to these types of roles in independent schools and gives you additional training. But first and foremost, or very important, is to understand yourself, what it is you want to do, and how that aligns with the school. Because you mentioned the burnout before, or just the taxing toll it can take on us. And some of that is because we are passionate about what we do. We are passionate about this work. We know the conversations that we want to happen or that need to happen. And sometimes there's the pushback on the other side, whether it's from the school, from the administration, from the families, from the students. So what do you do when those things are not aligned, or, you can see things through your lens that they can't see? And so how do you, either hang in there and deal with that, or, push in gentle ways, or in some not so gentle ways sometimes. And so those are some things that I ask people or talk to people about, just to get a sense of what they're thinking. This job is not glamorous. And by all means, we care a whole heck of a lot about what we do and about our students and about this work. And so how do you find a space that will nurture and support that? Because as I mentioned at the top, like sometimes it's window dressing. Sometimes schools check the box, we know we need this position, but then you get in to do the work and it's like, oh, wait a minute, right? Because we are in there kind of holding the lights and holding the mirror to things that either the school doesn't see or they don't want to see sometimes.
Mm. All right, let me give you some rapid fire questions, and you can just respond quickly, concisely, because I'm just not able to ask everybody what's really on my mind, but because I know you, I can just put it out there. So um, uh, code switching. Are independent schools doing more harm to kids of color by asking them to be who they're not? Or are they creating the kind of space that allows them to foster their true genius and be who they are and capitalize on the resources and opportunities there? What's your sense, code switching?
Mm, mm. Good question. Depends on the school.
Mm. Nigger word, nigger. How present, how prevalent is it in the schools? I mean, I know it's in the academics, but have you found that dealing with this word is as prevalent in a independent private school as it would be in the kind of schools you went to when you were growing up in Brooklyn?
No, in the sense that schools I went to in Brooklyn, public schools, it was everywhere. Folks are using it. It it was lingo, whereas in the independent schools, there is more taboo around it, and students are using it feeling like this is a word, you know, I'm testing boundaries here. Growing up in Brooklyn in public school, there were no boundaries.
White people, they shouldn't be directors of diversity. I mean, this is a job for people of color. How do you respond? How would you respond if a white person asked you about holding this job?
Same way I would respond. First question is to anyone. First question is always why, right? So, why do you want to do this? What is your goal, your passion, your thought? What do you want to accomplish? And for me, I'm looking for a knowledge of self, a knowledge of identity. And the only difference from a white person, are they speaking from an ally perspective? How much work have they done on self? And is that going to be part of how they show up in this role?
Let me ask you one more. Affinity groups. Are they important at the independent school level? And is elementary school too early to start an affinity group space?
Yes, they are important. No, lower school is not too early. They should be in lower school as well. Different context, different conversation, but group can still be held.
Yeah, yeah. Well, um, this is a bonus rapid fire. When am I going to see Dr. Henry? Just gonna put that out there because I feel like I'm talking to Dr. Henry. The only thing missing is just the title. So the qualifications, the skill set is there. I just want to put that out there. But thinking about that, what's on the horizon the next 10 years as you look at Shanelle Henry over the next 10 years? What are some things you got cooking? What are some things you have planned? What are you excited about over the next decade?
Yeah, I'm excited about still being, you know, a voice in this space. That can morph, grow, change. I hope it does in terms of, you know, the way in which I show up. Certainly, I hope the Institute continues to blossom, grow, educate more educators across the country as it is continuing and starting to do now. Folks ask me this question all the time in terms of, you know, 3, 5, 10 years and seeing bigger things for me than I think I see for myself, because for real, like, my passion is to do this particular work, whether it's in this role, or, you know, currently doing what I'm doing, or in some other way, shape, or form. For me, the passion has always been, you know, since I found my voice, continuing to be a voice and an educator for diversity, equity, social justice, in whatever form that takes. So I enjoy working with students. I've been in strictly adult spaces, particularly enjoy working with students. But yeah, like, for me, it's this. And I know some people are not satisfied with that answer, but for me, it's doing this. I know what I do. I enjoy what I do. I love what I do.
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And I won't go away that easily, but I'll receive that today. Let me ask you to help us out. We've been asking people, what are you reading? What are you watching? What are you listening to add to our, while you're in quarantine, check this out. Is there anything streaming wise you've recommend or would recommend, or maybe something you're reading or listening to you would recommend as we get ready to close out?
Yeah. I just actually started watching, what is it on Netflix? The Black AF, I will call it, uh,
Hmm.
series. Like, literally just started it, and it's been interesting because I've been reading the dialogue about that online on social media. You know, folks who appreciate that series, folks who are critical of that series, and so I said, let me tune in and see what this is about, because there's a lot of backstory there about the creator of that. He's the same director creator of, like, Blackish and Mixedish and Grownish and that whole series. But it's been interesting to follow that dialogue and that banter, because one thing, we haven't talked about today, but we've talked about before, is this notion of colorism within communities of color, particularly in the Black community. So I just started that series and have mixed feelings, my own mixed feelings about what I've seen so far. And then also actually have it handy, but I brought this home during my quarantine. Have you read Surviving Becky's yet?
I have not, but I know Sister Cheryl has. I haven't seen it in binding, so I got to get me a copy, but I'm so happy for that. How is it?
So I'm about to start this. This is my next read.
Okay, okay, okay. Well, you have to come back and let us know how that goes. Shanelle Henry, you know, I just appreciate you always supporting a brother from the beginning. And anytime you want to come to WPC and present or attend, whatever, there's always a space. As long as you'll collaborate, we'll be willing to be in partnership with you. And I'm looking forward to the next 10 years, whatever they are, however you decide they will be. But I just hope along the way, we're still in collaboration.
Appreciate you.
Much love to you. Take care. Give my best to my niece and nephew. Take care of yourself.
I will. You too. Love to the fam.
Appreciate you. Thank you. Thank you.